Shalom and welcome to In the Beginning. I'm Rabbi Eric Tokajer with Brit Am Messianic Synagogue in Pensacola, Florida. My co-host,
Wayne Leland, Rabbi of Israel Messianic Synagogue in Navarre, Florida.
And our special guest today is Evan Lieberman, all the way from Israel. And Evan, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we have a special program. You know, we talk about Bible and Bible topics on our program, how to understand the Scriptures, how to share the Scriptures, learning the Scriptures from an in-the-beginning perspective, learning precepts of walking out our life as believers in a biblical fashion, starting with Genesis and working through Revelation, not picking and choosing. And this week we have a special guest, and that's Evan from Israel, and he is a investment broker, correct?
Investment advisor, yes.
Investment advisor from Israel. And we're going to share some things that I think are exciting. One is how you can not only bless Israel by investing in Israel, because I know most of our listeners, and if not all of them, love Israel and want to support Israel and do what they can, but also how you can be blessed by blessing Israel in the process. And this is a biblical precept. You know, I will bless those who bless you is a biblical concept, a biblical precept. So this is not out of the scope of our regular program. It's just a different direction or a different look at it. And so, Evan, why don't you share a little about yourself? How did you get here today? I mean, not driving your car, but how did you get to the point where you're advising investments in Israel? And where were you born? Where do you live now? Those kind of things. Kind of a background for our listeners.
Okay, good. Okay, so basically I'm a Messianic Jewish believer, and I grew up here in the Messianic movement. My parents were very involved in that, and but back in the 1990s, I felt a call to go to Israel, make Aliyah, be part of what's going on, what God is doing among our Jewish people, be a light to our people there. So when I was there, I understood that essentially investing in Israel is one way of people getting involved from abroad without actually going there. They can hook some of their finances essentially to the prosperity that God is bringing to our people and support Israel in that way. And so I realized that there is not a good amount of information in English for people abroad to know how to get involved in the Israeli market. And we're talking the stock market, the bond market, that sort of thing. And so I created Wise Money Israel, which is a wisemoneyisrael.com website. And we provide assistance with people to open brokerage accounts, to be able to be invested in the market themselves. We give a lot of information and education. We give investment advising services, and we also manage people's accounts there.
Wonderful. I want to remind everybody that even though we have a special guest this morning, you're welcome to call in at 623-1330, 623-1330, or you can post your questions on our Facebook page, In the Beginning radio program. You know, I'm really excited about what you're doing, Evan, because, you know, like many others, both Jewish and non-Jewish, in America, our hearts are with Israel, our prayers are with Israel, and many of us would like to be actively involved in blessing Israel, but so many of us don't know how. You know, not all of us can fly over there or buy a home over there or even make Aliyah. Partially, like myself, I would have difficulty making Aliyah because of being a Jewish believer, and that's known, so it's not like I can sneak under the radar and do that. So. But at the same time, I want to support Israel. I go there as often as I can. But many of our listeners can't just hop on a plane and go to Israel and support. And they listen to different people on the television or on the radio and that are collecting money that aren't necessarily believers, that aren't really supporting Israel in the way we would think. Some of these big-time humanitarian, and I use that word, I'd like to do air quotes, but you can't see that on the radio, are really only giving like 3 or 4% of the money that's given to their organizations that actually ever reaches Israel. Much of the money goes to investing in airplanes and offices and employees and all that stuff, and very little actually gets to Israel. So there's a lot of people that would like to directly bless Israel. And so you've formed this agency so that people can take their money, invest it in Israel, bless Israel, and be blessed in return. And we were talking earlier about, there's so much going on. Jonathan Kahn's a friend of mine, and he wrote his book on the Shemitah year, and people are very concerned about what's going on economically, and there's almost a level of fear among believers in the States of what could happen with the economy, with the decision of the Supreme Court coming up and other decisions that are going on, and a very strong appearance of, if not a direct attack on faithful believers. And what's going to happen economically? And you were sharing that a little history about what happened during the last big recession, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to share what happened in Israel versus what happened in the U.S. there, and the fact that Israel's economy has really been blessed, as it should be biblically, and because it is God's land where His name is written upon. So share a little bit from that direction, so it kind of lets our people know where you're coming from as far as advising them in their funds that way.
Okay, so that's good. Investing in Israel's capital market, in the stocks and bonds of Israel, is in fact the way that investors around the world or believers around the world that want to support Israel can do it on an active, proactive basis. 100% of their money is going toward the financing of the operations of companies, whether that be through bonds or stocks. And essentially, the companies is what generates the engine of growth of the Israeli economy. And so, all of what happens to the individuals that work in Israel has to do with the success of the companies that they work for. To the extent that the companies are able to raise funds through the capital market, people are buying their bonds, they're able to expand, they're able to employ more people, they're able to raise the cost of living, they're able to create new innovations, new research and development, and essentially one of Israel's callings is, if not the major callings, to be a light to the nation. And one of the things we're seeing is at some of these innovations that are coming out of the Israeli high-tech, for example, sector or biotech is great innovations which is helping the world. And so while it doesn't sound as spiritual as, let's say, giving to a ministry in Israel, when you support the companies of Israel, you are in fact supporting directly the people of Israel, the innovation of Israel, and ultimately you are helping Israel be the light to the nations it was called to be. You touched on the concept of how well Israel did, for example, in the latest recession. People are concerned, as you said, about where their finances are. Sometimes their finances have been going up and down, and they've suffered loss, for example, in 2008, and they say, well, I'm looking for a place where I can put some of my money, which will be safer. How can you assure me that Israel is going to be safer? And obviously, I can't assure anyone that what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know the future per se, but what I do see is if we look back at what happened during the latest crisis, which was supposedly a once-in-a-100-year event like the Great Depression, we see that Israel, in fact, never experienced recession at all. The Great Recession, by definition, did not hit Israel. Recession is considered from economists as 2 quarters of negative gross domestic product growth. Israel did not experience not even 1 quarter of negative growth. Israel kept growing at a rate of 1.9% in 2009, whereas the rest of the world went down somewhere between 6 and 9% into negative growth. Israel continued to grow. Israel's unemployment is low. Israel did not get into all of the banking fiascos that America did, all the credit default swaps and these sorts of things that caused major banks in America to fail. No bank failed in Israel, and they were just not allowed, the banks, to invest in these sort of risky assets. The subprime that plagued America doesn't exist in Israel, only because the banking system will not allow you to take a mortgage on a house unless you have approximately 30 to 50% down payment. So this concept of zero down loan just didn't exist. And so because of Israel's conservative banking, because of Israel's fiscal policy, which doesn't get into large amounts of debt, Israel did not have to print money. Israel did not have to experience going through high unemployment and high GDP negative growth.
You know, I look at this investing in Israel in 2 ways. One of those is, a lot of us give donations to ministries and to humanitarian aid groups that go to Israel. And when you invest in Israel, there's the old proverb that says, teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. And many of us that give humanitarian aid, which is wonderful and necessary, basically are giving a man a fish. We help them for a short term. But if you invest in a corporation or a company in Israel, which allows them then to employ people, then you're teaching them to fish, and you're providing a long-term blessing and benefit rather than a short-term. Short-term's important, but long-term. And the second part of that is if all of us give humanitarian aid without expecting any. When I give money to Israel, or I buy jackets for soldiers, or I do any of the many things that we do every year to support the people in Israel, I'm not expecting any kind of return on my investment. When I give the money, it's gone, it's to them, and they use it. But investing in Israel not only allows you to give aid to Israel in a real way, but it actually allows you also to reap a return on that investment, which is a unique thing that I know that many people don't really consider when they think about how can I bless Israel, how can I provide for Israel in that way, which allows us then to be able to bless further. If you make money, you're then able to give more money.
Correct. And because contributions, and I do support that as well, and there's lots of good causes in Israel, when you contribute, because you're not seeing a return on it, you're going to give usually a small amount that you can depart with that is not going to, let's say, affect your lifestyle. And when you're investing, you're able to give a lot more in the sense that you're investing it. You're putting 100% in. You're expecting return so that next year you're at 105% of your money, 110% of your money, so to speak. And so you're able to put a lot of more money, firepower, so to speak, to supporting Israel at any given time because you're expecting it to come back with interest. And like you said, the profitability, once you're making Israel profitable, but your own account is being profitable, and from that you can always contribute more to Israel. So it's a virtuous cycle.
Absolutely. Again, the phone number here is 623-1330, 623-1330. One thing I'd like to say at this point is that for those that are interested in finding out more about investing in Israel than we're going to be able to cover on this program, Evan is going to be giving a seminar this afternoon at 5 o'clock at our synagogue in Pensacola, Brit Am Messianic Synagogue at 6700 Spanish Trail. And there you'll not only hear his presentation, but he'll take time to talk with you one-on-one and share how much and how this and how that the process is to do so. And one of the things that we shared earlier, because I asked the question earlier, was if I invest money in Israel, how much do I lose in the currency exchange? When we deal with things, one of the realities of changing from one nation to another is that the money changers, which have been around since the time of the temple and before, get their little piece of the money, but it's relatively insignificant, the amount of money that's lost in an exchange going through a brokerage house like yours.
Correct. We work with brokerages, specifically Wise Money Israel. My firm has an agreement with Meitav Dash, which is the largest brokerage in Israel, the Merrill Lynch, so to speak, of Israel. And they only take 0.6% as a commission on transferring the money from one currency to the other. They do that essentially as a service to their clients so they can gather more money. They don't want to put barriers to investors from all over the world to invest using their foreign currency and exchanging to shekels so that they can invest in the market. And so if you were to put in, for example, $100, you would see $99.4 of value in the shekel when it's translated. And so it's not burdensome.
Right, which is really important because there's some investments where you lose a lot off the top end just getting into it.
Right.
And this doesn't bring that about. So, again, that's to me is exciting because the more I can invest, the more I bless Israel, but also the more that I don't lose in the process, the more I get back on my investment and my return.
That is another way, by the way, that some people look at as investing in Israel is diversifying their funds out of the dollar, getting it into a different currency. And it turns out that the Israeli shekel is, on a relative basis, a very strong currency because the economy is on spec, a very strong economy. And so there's a lot of foreign investment going into buying the shekel just as a currency itself. And so if we look over the long pull, people that have been investing from the dollar into the shekel have, in fact, made money just by having the money sit there in shekels.
Okay, I forgot to do a couple of things at the opening of the program, so I'm going to do that, and then we have a phone call we're going to go to. I wanted to remind everybody that beautiful song that opens and closes our program is sung by Natasha Krause Reynolds, written and produced by Tamara Alexander and Jonathan Lane, and you can find out more about Natasha and Tamara and Jonathan by going to psalmplace.com. That's psalmplace.com. I also want to remind you that our program is sponsored and supported by the Messianic communities across the Gulf Coast. One of those is Congregation Mayim Chaim, and Congregation Mayim Chaim is the Eastern Shores Messianic Synagogue, and they meet at 10526 County Road 64 in Daphne, Alabama. And you can learn more about them by going to shalomeasternshore.com. And those that are listening to the program that are on the Eastern Shore or in Mobile or even out toward Mississippi, on Tuesday evening, Evan is going to be giving a seminar at Congregation Mayim Chaim. And so go on their website. They'll be able to find all the information about the location and the time of that. So Congregation Mayim Chaim, shalomeasternshore.com. And if you missed all of that, you can go on our Facebook page, In the Beginning Radio Program, and find the link for shalomeasternshore.com. Gene, welcome to the program.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are we doing?
Doing great. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Listen, one thing that you guys brought up earlier as I was driving, I heard you mention about opening an account in Israel and investing your money there. I am all for that. I just want to advise one thing on your listeners this morning. Make sure if you decide to open up a brokerage account in a foreign country like that you do disclose that on your tax form.
Absolutely.
And the reason why is there's a form that's required by the IRS called the FBAR. It's a foreign bank account, something. I don't remember all the words to it. But basically what that does is it keeps you from being suspected by the IRS of either tax evasion or fraud of some sort.
Right.
Evan, I'm sure you're probably aware of that.
I'm very familiar with that. I think the minimum, if I'm not mistaken, is if you have an account of $10,000, right? So if you open a $10,000 account, then there's a form as part of your yearly taxes that you indicate that you have a foreign brokerage account over there. Very, very good. Good point.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that with everyone because, of course, I'm all for supporting Israel, but I just want to make sure your listeners, because the IRS can usually go back up to 3 years, but if they suspect fraud, they can go back as long as they want. So just wanted to share that with your listeners, and I look forward to your seminar, Steve.
Good, absolutely. And just if you're going to touch on taxation, you report your gains in Israel exactly as you report your gains in America on your American taxes, so that you make sure that you're paying here. You're actually exempt from most gains that you make in Israel, and so they expect you to pay your taxes here just like you would on any other securities gains.
Absolutely. Yep, you're correct. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your
call,
call,
Gene.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you. It's interesting that the IRS is very active around the world. It used to be that people would take and drop their money in Switzerland, or they drop their money in the Cayman Islands or other places to hide their assets. And it's only been in the last little while, really, that the IRS has become very, very active in investigating those things and all. So it is important that people understand we're not promoting hiding money in Israel in any way. We're saying that one of the ways you can diversify your assets, your investments, would be to invest in another country, and Israel is a very solid investment platform.
Correct. That's what we're looking for. Essentially, those people are looking to hedge their bet against the United States dollar as the current world reserve currency and strong currency around the world, would want to consider placing money in other currencies, in other markets, in other geographies that have other dynamics other than that of the United States in the financial world here.
Right. And, one of the things that you were talking about earlier was that Israel's banking regulations are much more strict in many ways. In the United States, you can buy a house with nothing down. In Israel, you have to have 30% or more down in order to buy a house,
right,
and things like that, which really protect the assets and the financial markets in a way that aren't necessarily here. That's why we had the big problem we had here. We were loaning money to people who couldn't afford to pay it, and eventually when you do that, the people aren't able to pay it, and all that ends up dumped on the market, where
right.
Israel doesn't have those laws in place, or has laws in place to prevent that
right.
from happening.
Israel is a small enough nation that the regulators need to make sure that the small person is taken care of, and that the whole industry, the financial industry, is sustained and protected, because we don't want to mess up. We don't want our little small country, so to speak, to go down because of some, let's say, greed in the financial banking industry that just wants to squeeze a little bit more profit out. And so they're definitely on the side of the consumer to make sure that this consumer doesn't make mistakes for himself.
Right. And another thing to consider, and I know that those who study the Bible, those that love Israel in that direction, is that Israel can't afford to have a economic collapse similar to what the United States had recently, because so much of their money for the country has to be in defense because they're surrounded so closely by enemies that they have to protect their market to protect their country in a way that's unique and different from the United States. Stan, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You all were talking about you would report your gains in the same manner that you do now. What if you have a tax-deferred account?
Is the question, can you invest your retirement account in Israel?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. We partner with a U.S. IRA administrator that opens what's called self-directed IRAs, which are sanctioned by the IRS to allow you to invest in alternate investments, not just, let's say, U.S.-based mutual funds, which is what most IRAs invest in. Self-directed IRA is allowed to invest anywhere. And so we've worked with them to open Israeli investment accounts for their clients. So essentially a 401k, 403b, IRA, traditional Roth, etc., can roll over into a self-directed IRA and can invest in an Israeli investment account.
Okay, so if I have a 401k with one of the American major firms, I can roll that into a self-directed IRA, and you all can assist with that.
Right. Now, not all IRA administrators are as flexible as others in the sense of opening self-directed IRAs that will invest in foreign brokerage accounts. So you'd have to check with your particular one. I know the one that we work with, Summit Trust Company, in fact, does work, and we worked through all the paperwork that they had to do with the brokerage in Israel. And so that's a tried and true mechanism that we have, and you roll it over from one administrator to the other.
Okay, so it would be up to my current brokerage firm, my current firm, for me to decide whether or not I have the ability to do that. I'm a little confused.
The way it works actually is when you open, let's say you go to Summit and you say, Summit, I want to invest in Israel. So they would give you the forms. You fill them out online, and one of those forms would be what's called an asset transfer form, in which they take care of working with your current administrator to roll over those funds into a Summit IRA versus your current IRA. So that's the way that works, and that's a very standard practice, is to rolling over between one IRA administrator to the other. They're pretty transparent from that perspective. And
all that can be done in the tax-deferred status, so you don't pay the penalty.
Exactly.
Okay.
Rolling over from one IRA to another, even from one type of IRA, not just administrator, but one type of IRA from a 401k to a traditional, etc., does not incur any tax problems or any tax events, and continues your tax-deferred status, which is, in fact, a very key thing for creating, as you know, better compounding returns, is to keep that tax-deferred status as long as you can.
Okay, excellent.
I want to remind our listeners that our program is sponsored and supported by not only the Messianic communities across the Gulf Coast, but some of the different organizations that support us, like the Messianic Times. And one of the things, the reason I brought that up is because Evan writes a monthly blog that's posted on the Messianic Times website. It's one of our most popular blogs. Not only does he deal with investing in Israel, but sometimes he puts little clips of what's going on in Israel so people can keep up with some of the behind the scenes. He doesn't go into a lot, but little clips that help us to understand because the events going on in Israel affect the markets and what's going on financially in Israel. So in having a friend in the land that can share the what's really happening versus sometimes what we hear on our American news is a big plus. So I thank him for being a steady contributor to the Messianic Times and for his monthly blogs that he provides there. So,
yeah, Evan, since you're here with us today, perhaps you could just kind of fill us in on what's actually going on in the land today. We're always wanting to know that. All people in our congregation always want to know what's happening in Israel, and so sometimes with all the media the way it is over here, we really don't know what really is happening.
Okay, well, there was a lot of unknown what was going to happen with the latest elections. As you were probably following that, there was a real question: is Israel going to continue to put its defense needs as the key driver to who gets elected? And Netanyahu was obviously going on, we have enemies, we need to defend ourselves against those enemies, and therefore you need to continue to keep me in office. And there was a very strong push from the left to say, okay, now we're secure in Israel. Now what we can do is we can focus on the social issues and on the cost of living and on the things that most economies deal with as primary. And what it turns out is Israel voted with its feet to say, I think we still have a lot of enemies, and we still need to finance our defense and our military, and still put on as a secondary issue those social programs that are very important, but not at the expense of keeping us safe. And so Israel is still surrounded by enemies that want our destruction. What we see going on with ISIS and with Syria is our neighbor. And while we haven't been drawn into the conflict yet, ISIS and some of the rebel factions in Syria are getting very, very close to our northern border. In fact, there are Druze communities which are in the north of Israel, which are not Jewish and they're not Arab, but they have counterparts and their families essentially on the other side of the border in Lebanon and in Syria. And those other Druze in Syria are being threatened now by the terrorists, essentially, of massacre. And so Israel may be drawn in the future to defending its border on the north with Syria. Obviously, we've just had a war that we won again in Gaza, and that's usually a once every few year event. And one of the good things that comes out of these, so to speak, events is Israel's military is always having to retrain and to reinvent and re-innovate to come up with the next defense against the new weapons that the enemy has formed against us. So we see Iron Dome is one of the missile defense systems that Israel has developed and had, unfortunately, to train and to perfect to such a point in which the Gaza war wasn't much of a contest at all. There were thousands of missiles being sent over to Israel, and very few of them were even able to hit any sort of populated areas, and most of them were shot down before they could even reach Israel. And so that's a very real thing that we deal with. On a daily basis, I don't think about it very much, but if I look at globally what's happening, Israel's threatened, but God is with Israel. And we see in the last 60 years, if we don't see from the rest of the Bible the last thousands of years, that whenever people would come against Israel, God would step in and God would defend Israel. And so while, in some sense, when I look with my natural eyes, I see Israel, it's very important that we defend ourselves. But the reality is, when I look with my spiritual eyes, I realize God is looking out for the nation and is putting in place things. For example, even in the energy dependence that we have on these other nations and OPEC and oil and these sorts of things. When the Arab Spring happened back in 2010, I believe it was, in which there was uprisings in all of the Arab nations around us to cause revolution, which could have threatened the very fabric of the geopolitics in the Middle East. Egypt became what was a cold partner, cold peace with us. They had a pipeline of natural gas that was coming and piping into our economy, so we would have some energy that we were very dependent on for electricity and other industry. And so when the Arab Spring happened and the revolution happened and terrorists started blowing up that pipeline, so suddenly Israel's energy needs were being threatened. And it turns out in the same time period as when Israel discovered natural gas reserves on a world scale that dwarfed some of the discoveries that had come before then. And everyone assumed that Israel doesn't have any natural resources, and all the oil was given to all the Arab nations around us. And suddenly, it turns out, just at the right time, God was able to provide us ultimately what turned out to be energy independence or virtual energy independence, such that we are now selling natural gas back to Egypt through the same pipeline that they used to send to us, and then the terrorists were blowing up. The pipelines were repaired, and now the stream is going in the reverse direction. So God has a sense of humor in saying, you're going to come against me, you're going to try to destroy Israel. And here I'm going to show you that Israel is well taken care of, and we're going to end up selling back to you the resources you need.
Yeah, the biblical theme of what you meant for evil, God used for good,
right.
Happens all the time. A lot of people don't understand that Israel's position today is strong, but the areas around them have become so precarious where, for instance, before Israel had to worry about Syria and Assad. Now they have Syria and Assad and also ISIS and also... So you have, where there was one enemy that could be identified, now you have that enemy fighting against two other enemies which all want you destroyed but are fighting each other at the same time. And so we do have, for instance, this last week, a rocket came over from Syria into the Golan that was reported, but it was a mistake. It wasn't actually fired at Israel. It just overflew its intended target and landed in Israel. So we have these things going on that as we're listening to things about ISIS as a faraway thing, people like yourself and those that live in Israel are following this as ISIS is involved with in Gaza now, and there's this fight between Hamas and ISIS going on there. You have the influence of ISIS and Hezbollah and other places around the region. So it's the enemy is dividing into multiple enemies against Israel, but God is still, during all this time, providing blessings and provision and protection for Israel, which is just an amazing thing for me to watch.
I think as long as dividing of the enemy might actually be a good thing. In other words, to the extent that the Arab world is united front against us, that's bad. To the extent that they're divided and they're fighting amongst themselves, as terrible as that is to their own people, it somewhat leaves us out of the picture. So we've had, even with all this chaos and threatening on the borders in the other neighboring nations, we've had relative security because essentially they're fighting in themselves.
Right, and interestingly enough, many of the nations that were described as enemies of Israel because of the influence of ISIS and others have really become much more connected with Israel. And, I look at things and I see in Isaiah where the scripture says eventually there's going to be one nation made up of Assyria, Israel, and Egypt. And years ago you looked and you said, well, how could something like that happen? But now Israel and Egypt have become very reasonably strong trading partners and working security. Matter of fact, there's been more, we don't hear about it, but more aggression by the Egyptian military against Hamas in Gaza than there has been Israeli. They've destroyed thousands and thousands of homes and are building a security fence, so to speak, between Gaza and Egypt. We don't hear about it much on the news because it's not Jews doing it, but Egyptians. And there was a comment made by an Egyptian officer that said, if Israel strikes needs to strike at Iran, they can, come over Egypt and we'll provide the gas for them.
Interesting.
So it's interesting, in Jordan also, and so it's interesting what's happening that way while all this is going on. But we've diverted from economy a little just to kind of because it's hard to have somebody from Israel come in and not talk something about what's going on that way. But at 5 o'clock, you're going to be coming to Bradam tonight. And for those that tuned in later, Evan Lieberman from Israel is with us. He's with Wise Money in Israel. And he's an investment advisor who has come over to the United States and is encouraging Americans to invest in Israel's economy. It's a very strong economy. And trying to let people know that it's an avenue that they can bless Israel and receive a result for their investment. And he's going to be with us at 5 o'clock at 6700 Spanish Trail in Pensacola. Very easy to find us. And if you're not sure where we are, just look up shalompensacola.com, and there's directions available on our website. But that's at 5 o'clock, and kind of give an overview of what you're going to be sharing tonight.
Okay, so we're going to look at a number of different aspects about investing in Israel. The first one we'll look at is what is the scriptural basis to investing in Israel. We want to make sure that before we go and put our money in some other country, that is a country that is backed by the Lord. And we'll see a lot of scriptures in which we brought out a few today, that God is for Israel. God has always been for Israel. It's the apple of his eye. and he wants its success, not because anything is special about the people of Israel, not that Israel are all believers and following the Lord, but God's promise to Israel sustains even when we're not faithful to Him. There is a growing amount of Jewish believers in Israel that are salt in the land and creating a desire to return to the Lord through Yeshua. And as that happens, I believe Israel will continue to be even more blessed of the Lord. But we'll go over some of the scriptural reasons why it's a wise thing to support Israel. Those people that support Israel, in fact, God looks favorably upon that and supports those people. And we'll look at how that works. We'll also look at some of the successes of Israel, specifically financially. How is Israel doing? How is that blessing that I believe is coming from the Lord manifesting itself in the economy? We'll have some good video clips as well to kind of help orient you as what is going on in Israel and what are some of the innovations that are taking place there. We'll talk about the market itself, the economy itself. We'll touch on some of the things we briefly described here, as far as what are some of the statistics on how well Israel is doing. It's just amazing when people actually focus on it. A lot of economists don't focus on the smaller nations because they would say, well, who would really want to invest in Israel? Well, a lot of believers would love to invest in Israel if they knew how. And knowing that the economy is a strong economy is the basis of why we would invest anywhere. We'll look a little bit at some of the concepts of national debt and deficit spending, some of the things of the reasons why you might want to consider not having 100% of your money tied up in the United States. And we'll look at the performance of the market, both from a bond market and a stock market perspective, to see how well have the markets done. What can I expect as far as a return on my money? We'll look at some investing principles such as diversification, liquidity, and things that you would need to know. And we'll go over a lot of the practical steps of how do I actually open an investment account even though I'm not going to Israel, I'm not in Israel, can all be done through the internet and the mail. And that's basically it. We'll open it up for questions. A lot of people come with similar questions, so we'll go over those similar questions, and then we'll have just a free-form discussion. And afterwards, I'll be able to talk on a one-on-one basis. Anyone who wants to actually sign up for an account, if they brought their passport and their driver's license, can all be done electronically.
Okay, and I want to, we have listeners that are long ways out of Pensacola that listen not only on the internet but also on the radio station, which is reasonably far-reaching. So I want to let people know that Evan is going to be in Daphne, Alabama on Tuesday, and then on June 24th he's going to be in the Jacksonville area and Point Verde Beach, and then he's going to be in Fort Lauderdale on the 25th, in Fort Pierce, Florida on the 27th, and then in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania at the MJA conference on June 30th. And you'll be there for that whole week, correct?
Correct.
And then in Grapevine, Texas on July 6th. So if you have family or friends in those areas, you can find, by the way, if you go to the Messianic Times, there's an article about his trip and what's doing on this visit, and all those dates and times are placed on there. And what was your website again for listeners that may be out of the area or just haven't had a chance to write it down?
Okay, it's www.wisemoneyisrael.com. One word, Wise Money Israel. And it somewhat goes back to the discussion that Yeshua has about the wise steward of the money. And he gives to three of his servants different amounts of finances to go and invest them. And after a long time, the master comes back and asks, what have you done with my money? And the parable of the talents obviously speaks to talents, the things that God has given you, abilities, and these sorts of things. But if you look at the simple interpretation of it, in fact, does talk about investing and taking risk. And the first steward that took 10 and made another 10 made a 100% return on his money. It doesn't say how long it took. Likely it was a longer-term investing because the master was gone for a while. So it specifically talks to this area of taking the finances you have, investing them wisely, and not burying them and putting them in a place where it doesn't make any money for you. As the steward that was chided for hiding his money, Yeshua said, at least you should have put it in a bank to get interest. Even if you're not going to take a lot of risk, take a little risk. That's better than hiding your money in 0% CDs at a bank.
Now, earlier we were talking, and you had a slide that you told the stock market in the U.S. over a 10-year, or bond market, I think it was. Was it stock or bond?
I had both.
Okay. market in the U.S. over a 10-year period versus the numbers of the bond market and stock market in Israel. It'd probably be interesting to our listeners to hear those numbers because, to me, it was very encouraging.
Well, I will show a slide at the presentations about some of the statistics that you can look up yourself, but I've made it into a chart format. That the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, the Tel Aviv 25, which is similar to America's Standard & Poor's 500 or the Dow Industrial Average, over the last 10 years has made a total return of 154%. That's over a 10-year period, so we're talking maybe 12% growth compounded year over year on an average. But if we look compared to, for example, the United States, what is that Standard & Poor's 500 index of the largest companies here done? It has only returned 73%. So about a half of the return. If you had invested in Israel, you would have made double your money. European stocks did even worse. They made about a third of what Israel did, and the FTSE index in London, FTSE 100 only made about 32% during those 10 years. So that was not as wise of an investment. We talked a little bit about the bond market. In the last 6 years, the bond market has averaged about 6% return year over year. And so that's more of a safer play for those people who are more interested in hanging on to their money but making a safe, solid return year over year. I would suggest a combination of Israeli corporate bonds, investing in the corporations that we talked about that run the Israeli economy, the engine behind it, or some mix of corporate bonds and Israel government bonds, which is considered a risk-free investment.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. Nearly double the investment return if you were in the Israeli market versus the Standard & Poor's in the U.S. over a 10-year period. Now, I don't know about you, Rabbi Wayne, but I'd much rather make 50% more.
Yeah, I liked it a lot better
than the other. Now, there's no guarantee that's going to happen, but over that 10-year period, that is precisely what did happen.
Right, exactly.
And so, it's important to say there's no guarantee.
And we'll take a look at this chart I was telling you about, the GDP growth. I'll have a chart of the same 10-year period, and we'll look comparing Israel's economy and the growth of the economy, which is a sign of its health. And you will see that how Israel is way outperforming all the other developed nations. And when economists and investors and institutions that have billions of dollars look to invest, they look at these sort of statistics to try to see how sound is this economy. And when they see that it's way outpacing other economies, then they put their money into that, and they cause the market prices to go up from higher demand. And so there is a connection between the economy, the robust economy of Israel, to the growth of the corporations, to the stock and bond markets going up, and as well as the currency itself going up. And so we see this all kind of going together in the same direction upward.
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left in the program, and the phone number here is 623-1330, 623-1330. If you have a question for Evan, this would be an ideal time for you to call and find out some answers to your direct question. Again, he'll be there tonight at Brit Am at 5 o'clock, and you can come and talk to him there, and he'll give a complete presentation there, but we want to give you opportunity here. And we do have a phone call. Miss Jean.
Yes. Thank you for taking my call, and I have a question for Evan. I'm wondering about, I know he's not an insurance broker, but I'm wondering about variable annuity where you would have a guaranteed minimum withdrawal benefit in it. Is there anything like that you can invest your retirement savings in?
Okay, so you're right in the sense that I'm not licensed for insurance brokering. The closest thing you'll come in the capital market in Israel is in an investment account having fixed income securities. And so if we're talking corporate bonds that are paying interest payments on a quarterly basis, then you are guaranteed those payments every quarter for the life of the bond. And so let's say you were to take a 10-year bond and it pays, let's say, 6% per year. Every quarter you're receiving 1.5%, and that's going to cash. And if you wanted to, you could withdraw that cash back to your bank in America with a simple email to the brokerage.
Okay, so So you wouldn't have like a variable annuity. It would be investment in stocks or bonds, and you would be getting a quarterly return on it as a regular income, right?
Correct. And the variable part, by the way, you can invest in instruments which are, of course, fixed rate if you want, or you can invest in those that are adjusted according to the Bank of Israel interest rates. And so if you're concerned about interest rates going up, for example, you want to be hooked into that. As we are at obviously very low interest rates, the likelihood of going up is much higher. And then there are also those that are tied to inflation. If you're concerned about inflation eating into your capital, that 70% of corporate and government bonds are in fact tied to inflation. And so it would vary if inflation becomes around the world because of money printing a real problem, then you would make more money on those particular bonds.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. You would have like a predictable stream of lifetime income, and you would be growing your retirement assets on a tax-deferred basis at the same time through like an IRA situation.
Yes, to 99% of what you said. The parts that are correct is that you can invest through a retirement account in the United States, keeping your tax-deferring status and compounding your interest essentially over time. The only word that's different from an annuity versus investing in the capital market is the guaranteed part. So the guarantee is, of course, with a bond, that the corporation or the country, if it's an Israeli government bond, is guaranteeing the payment up until the point in which they can guarantee it. And just like an insurance company with a variable annuity is you are at the mercy of that company staying in business or the reinsurer behind them staying in business. And to that extent, a guarantee is only as good as the insurer is. In the corporate bond market, there are credit rating agencies, which Standard & Poor's and Moody's in Israel, which will essentially say this is a double A rated bond. The chances of you never getting, of missing a payment is virtually zero, let's say. And the government Israel is obviously never defaulted on a payment or principal payment for the life of the country.
Okay, but that would be a specific... I'm thinking, is there something
security,
where you'd be
right.
diversified across several companies, and an instrument like that, or are you talking about you'd be investing in a specific company?
Right. Well, there's a number of ways of first of all, you would never want to invest 100% of your money in a specific company.
Right.
And so as an annuity does, it spreads it across multiple industries and different durations of bonds and different things that you can do to mitigate risk of that. And so we put together portfolios for people that, in fact, diversify across all those different sectors and types of assets, government and corporate, and different types of interest rate models that we talked about here, inflation and non-inflation, that sort of thing. And so you're not dependent on one corporation.
Okay, and you have an instrument like that, and it would include guaranteed income, right?
Right. The instrument probably that you will be looking for is likely an ETF, if you're familiar with exchange-traded funds, which diversifies across, let's say, 60 different corporate bonds in different industries. And that pays essentially a conglomerated number of all the interest payments of all those companies based on the percentages in which they are in the index. So it's not an instrument that Wise Money Israel has. It's an instrument that the market has, which is an index which follows, let's say, those 60 largest bonds of Israel. The amount that it pays, though, is the difference between an annuity, which says we will pay you for your lifetime and beyond, let's say, 4%, the capital market does go up and down. And so it is investing from that perspective. Typically, annuities are probably going to give you a lower rate of return than the capital market itself because someone has to make money on the way. And so the insurance company is going to give you 4%. They'll probably make 6 or 7 on your money. And so if you're willing to take the extra risk, let's call it, of investing directly in the market, your upside will likely be higher.
Okay, that's good information. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your question.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Now, I know that some of the people listening are saying, okay, who's this Evan Lieberman guy, and why would I want to put money with him or invest with him? But I was looking on your paperwork, and the brokerages that you deal with are handling and managing $45 billion in assets.
Correct.
Now, that's more money than I have in my account.
Just a little bit more.
So this is, you're not a fly-by-night. You're not dealing with fly-by-night companies. You're not you're dealing with companies and brokerages that have a good, solid history and are dealing with large amounts of investors in their money.
Correct. In fact, your money is never with Wise Money Israel. Wise Money Israel is an investment advisory. Is able to, if you give us the limited power of attorney, to strictly buy and sell in your account. But your account and your funds, your money is held, in fact, with these brokerages firms. These firms are thousands of people with billions of shekels invested in them, and most of them have been around for 40 years, some of them since the beginning of the State of Israel. There are members on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. They're member firms, like you have a seat on the exchange in New York Stock Exchange. They have a seat on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. There's only 27 member firms, some of which are brokerages and some of which are banks. And on purpose, the regulator keeps the very large firms, so they have processes in place, securities for your funds. They don't invest your money. They don't do proprietary trading. They're very well and strictly regulated so that your money is secure in that account.
Okay, so I just want to make clear to our listeners that this is not some little rinky-dink outfit that we're dealing with. This is dealing with brokerages that deal with billions of dollars in assets and are, as you said, holders of seats in the exchange and such. So it's a safe investment, as much as safe can be in things, which is important because, there's a lot of people that come and go very quickly, and when they go with your money in their pockets. And we want to make sure that there's another thing I wanted to bring out that our listeners may be interested in. I was. As far as I know, you are the only Messianic believer that's a licensed Israeli securities advisor.
Correct.
So, when you're dealing with especially believers, as a Messianic Jew myself, I like to do business that not only blesses Israel but blesses the believers in Israel. And this is another reason to be involved with your agency, is that you are a Jewish believer in Yeshua or Jesus who is helping other believers and those that aren't believers, I'm sure, to invest in the land of Israel. And to me, that's like a double blessing. You're not only helping Israel, but you're helping believers in Israel, which I think is something that all of us should really pay attention to.
Right, exactly. And I work with another gentleman who is Amir Jiris, and he is a securities analyst who does a lot of fundamental analysis and helps us to determine some of the securities that we're putting into our portfolios. And he is also an Israeli native believer. And so we, in fact, are the only two in the industry in Israel currently that are believers. What we're looking to do is build that out more to the extent that we have more clientele. We're able to build out our business and hire more believers. We're trying to create essentially a firm in which we're able to bring believers in Israel into the financial sector, so we can be influences not only there are some doctors, there are some lawyers. We're trying to be salt in all the various areas of the society.
Right. It's interesting. A lot of our listeners may not know that believers have not historically been treated very well in Israel, but that's starting to see some change through people like you that are achieving a higher level of involvement in banking and in investments, in being doctors and lawyers, and being involved in many more government-involved agencies and such. And a big part of it is the young Israelis that are serving in the IDF, that are Messianic, that are showing themselves to be solid citizens and, in many ways, heroes of the interactions between Israel and its neighbors.
Right, very much
so. These things are changing, and to me it was really exciting to find out that you were doing this, and that as somebody who's looking to build this up more, another sector of the Israeli life that is having Messianic believers involved in it, where you can reach out and touch the lives of others through not preaching at them, but actually living a life that exemplifies what a believer in Yeshua is.
Right, yeah, that's a great point. And essentially, up until, let's say, 20 years ago, most of the Israeli believers were in some form of ministry, and so they were perceived as, okay, you're to the society, you're coming to convert me. And to the extent that Messianic Jews were able to have a a more secular occupation, people would take them a little bit more seriously. Oh, you're one of us. You're just a workaday guy, and you're helping to build up and sustain us as a people. You're one of us now. And so I think that is a way to be a light to our people, is in fact to be involved in those places in which they're involved. There are people, for example, in the banking community which would never be reached other than someone, in fact, interfacing with them on financial issues.
Evan, I'd like to ask you something while we only have a few minutes left, and that is that listening to all this, would it not be true that over here in America or even around the world, the believers in Messiah, whether Jewish or Gentiles who've come to faith, that to participate in investing in Israel, which to me is investing in the kingdom of God, that's just how I feel about it, is that would cause, if all of a sudden a lot of people start investing from it, wouldn't that really be like something that would take a strong notice to the Jewish people who haven't accepted Messiah yet, to see how we're really pushing that economy, we're blessing that economy, we're putting our finances, our money where our mouth's at.
Absolutely.
Where that would bring a touching of their heart to see how because really that's what we're really supposed to be doing anyway. I just don't think a lot of us has caught on to it yet.
I agree. I do even see this in my line of work, that to the extent that I'm working with some of the executives of some of these brokerages, and they're beginning to recognize that not exclusively, but a lot of my clientele are believers, and they're believers from abroad. And years ago, they couldn't fathom why would someone from the United States, for example, or other countries want to invest in our little economy. And I would explain to them, and it would give me an opportunity, not based on preaching at them, but just to explain their curiosity, that there are a lot of people out there that love Israel, that want to support Israel. They're looking for various ways of supporting Israel, and investing is one way. And I've had clients come through that were on a tour, and they wanted to open an account in person at the brokerage. And so they would be sharing their faith with these executives and say, we just love Israel. We just want to be a part. And we're not looking to make 100% return on our money. We just want a solid return on our money, but know that our money is being put to work to build this nation that we believe God is for. And they're astounded to hear that someone is for them with no preconditions, not preaching at them, just wants to be a part in some way.
Yes, and an ideal, too, that they'll soon come to understand it. We're serving the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and when they see us doing this, that should provoke them even more to jealousy for their own Messiah.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm excited about you being here, and I hope that you will continue to come back. I think that really this is the beginning of letting people know that, hey, there is a way, because I think a lot of people wants to do this. They just hadn't thought it through. They hadn't had an opportunity.
Right.
And now God's using you to present an opportunity, and so I'm really excited about it.
Good. And I do feel, while it is my profession and a secular profession, I do feel a certain sense of calling from the Lord to give this opportunity to believers abroad to know that they can partner with Israel on a financial basis. I think part of what is likely happening is it's a precursor to a time in which the financial world out in the world is going to go through some turmoil. And I think in the next few years we're going to see some of that turmoil playing out, and we hope it's not as bad as 2008, 2009. But if it is, then I believe the Lord is calling for opportunities to invest in the work that He's doing in Israel, and at least so that some calamity might not come on all of their finances.
Well, I believe we are approaching the time when Messiah is going to return. I hope it's in our lifetime. I believe it is. And that we're going to see that Israel is going to be raised up higher and higher as a light to the nations, especially as more of the Jewish brothers and sisters accept Yeshua as the Messiah. I
agree. And then obviously there's a scripture that God has said that we will be the head and not the tail, that the nation of Israel, and that we will be the lender and not a borrower. And we'll go over one of the slides, in fact, that shows statistically how that scripture is coming to bear in Israel.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you as a guest. I'm looking forward so much to this evening's presentation. I invite all of our listeners, come out tonight to Brit Am Messianic Synagogue at 6700 Spanish Trail in Pensacola at 5 o'clock, and you'll have opportunity to hear the presentation, and those that are interested in investing will have an opportunity to speak one-on-one with Evan and even maybe open an account and start the transaction.